Hi, good day everyone. And for today, I'll be discussing to you Lesson 3, the Assure Model. Lesson Outcomes. Number 1 is identify learning theories and principles applied in the use and design of learning lessons with technology. So here, in number 1, we will be identifying the materials that a teacher uses to discuss with the technology. Number 2 is apply the Assure model in crafting a lesson. So here, we will know what is the Assure model. Introduction. A well-planned lesson is half of the battle won. The other half is the delivery of the lesson planned. This will ensure the achievement of learning outcomes. This will engage learners to perform expected standards. This is why it is important that before teaching, elements needed to incorporated when designing a plan have to be plotted well. So here, it is very important that before we have our discussion, we are ready. We have the materials needed before having a discussion to perform the expected standards, which is the students to learn. So before we go to deepen our discussion, we must first have our warm up. So, excite. Activity called stick O heads. Materials, sticky notes. So the steps. Number 1, group the class into 5 or 6 groups. 2, each member of the group will write words or concepts associated with the essential elements when planning a lesson. 3, write as many terms as possible given 3 minutes. And number 4, as a whole class, analyze the words and group them based into concepts that comprise the essential elements to be considered when planning a lesson. I hope the instruction is clear. And now we move on to our discussion. Yes po, uso po ang move on. Charis. So, analyze learners. Who is the audience? 1, demographics. 2, general characteristics. 3, entry competences. 4, learning preference. State objectives. Sorry, it was typo, but it is objectives. What students need to learn? Number 1 is learning outcomes. 2, course rubrics. A, skill or concept. B, proficiency or accuracy. C, conditions of performance. Select method, media, materials. What do instructors need to use for this to face online and hybrid teaching? 1 is to select instructional materials. 2, produce new materials. 3, repurpose existing materials. Utilize media materials. How do instructors use materials? 1 is preview materials. 2, prepare environment. And 3, to provide instruction. Require learner participation. Student will actively engage in by the following: discussion, small group activities, and formative assessment. Lastly is evaluate and revise. What works? What doesn't? Summative evaluation of the following. Number 1 is the instructional delivery. 2, revision of media and materials to improve students' outcomes. As you can see in the figure 1, this is the Assure model. Assure model is a guide of the teachers. In the next slide, I will be more explaining to you the Assure model. So, explore. The Assure model is a guide in crafting an instructional flow that can guide the teacher in integrating appropriate technology and media into the instructional process. It also refers to a systematic approach that the teacher can use when writing an instructional plan. The model is composed of 6 essential steps in planning instructions. Theoretically, it is a mental framework that the teachers consider. And the first step of the procedure is analyze learners. With the learner as the center of the instructional process, the initial consideration is to get a clear picture of the learner's styles, age level, interest, or preferences, background, special needs, and cultural diversity. So here in Analyze Learners is identifying what kind of learners you will have. Like where are they comfortable of? What is their interest? What is there needed more to learn? And to come up easily with the discussion. The second is the procedure is state objectives. This is the main instruction guide that will direct the flow to reach the target, known as the learning outcome expected of the lesson. These statements describe what the learner would be able to perform as a result of the instruction. So in this state objective, it is the learning outcome or the expectations of the learner into the discussion or into that subject. The third step is selecting methods, media, and materials. Selecting the appropriate way of delivering the lesson and using the applicable media or technology can effectively make the learners acquire understanding of the lesson or gain the competence desired. The teacher has to decide which strategy, materials, or technology would be best considering the learners and the desired learning outcomes. Here in Select Methods, Media, and Materials, it is important to make a decision to make a decision of which material will be the teacher will use that will be applicable to the learners. Example, a PowerPoint presentation. Example now, I am the teacher and I'm using a PowerPoint presentation for you to be able to understand what I'm discussing. The fourth step is utilize methods, media, and materials. Having selected the strategy, media, and materials is halfway of the task done. Planning how to implement this entails a lot of consideration. Bearing in mind the learning outcome of the lesson, the teacher decides which part of the instructional flow will a particular material or technology be employed in the manner and how will be more effective to achieve the learning outcome. In the third step is select, while here in the fourth step is utilize. What is the proper way of using the methods, media, and materials? How will be it more effective for the students to achieve the learning outcomes of the lesson? The fifth step is require learner participation. Student engagement is an important element. The learners have to be made to understand their role in taking accountability of their own learning. Therefore, the teacher has to design sections of the lesson where the learners are guided to participate in and perform tasks with minimal or no supervision at all. So as we all know, we are students learner-centered now. So the students' participation is very important to the entire discussion. It is important to know if the learners are learning in the discussion. Therefore, sometimes teachers are making recitations, assessments. It is also for the teachers to know that their students are listening and learning from the discussion. And the sixth and the last element is evaluate student performance. Assessing learners' performance can take place across phases of the lesson. However, it is emphasized that the basic rule, the evaluation, should be congruent to the learning outcome provided in the lesson. Some learning outcomes can be sufficiently evaluated using a pen and a paper test, but there are other learning outcomes that can be assessed by using rubric or having aggregated write-up through the use of a portfolio assessment. The teacher decides which is appropriate for the intention of the evaluative activity. Initially, whenever we are having a discussion, it is expected that after the discussion, there will be an evaluation or an assessment that the students must perform. And that must be related to the learning outcome of the lesson. Some assessments is using pen and a paper, but some is assessed by using a rubric. But after all, the teacher decides which is appropriate for the intention of the evaluative activity. I hope you've learned more in my discussion about the Assure model. For the next slide, we'll be having an activity, a task related to the Assure model, which is I discussed earlier.